now in North America in the late Cretaceous. The biggest being, about half of North America, is underwater in the late Cretaceous. There is a seaway running all the way through North America, from the Gulf of Mexico up to the Arctic Ocean. There, of course, are no Great Lakes, because the Great Lakes are something that were formed from glaciation millions and millions and millions of years after this happened. Florida, completely underwater. It's going to happen again. And so what we have, North America, back in the time of T-Rex, is actually 2 to 3 distinct land masses. It's all continental crust. It's one big unit of rock, but that rock is partially flooded, creating these seaways. As a result, what you have is that sediments that are laid down during this period of time through that belt of water are sediments of marine rock. Things like limestone, or mudstone, or sandstone from ocean waters. Now, where you see all the arrows pointing, this is where we have found fossils of T-Rex. T-Rex is only found in North America. It has close relatives in Asia. But the species itself, the species Rex, is only from here. On both sides of this seaway, because the seaway comes in and goes out over time, we have about, anyone want to guess how many total fossils of T-Rex we have discovered? 22. 22? A little higher. A little higher still. 57. There are 57 documented occurrences of T-Rex. Of those 57 documented occurrences of T-Rex, less than 14 are more than 50% complete. So even though we think of T-Rex as this very iconic animal, we actually don't understand it all very well. We have a very small sample size of T-Rex fossils. But this is where we have found those 57 occurrences. All the way up from Canada down to Texas, along the western margin of that ocean, and then on the eastern side we find it in the Dakotas. There's no T-Rex in Nebraska. Why? Because we're completely underwater. We're just not preserving that kind of rock during the Cretaceous. Now, a couple things to point out. There is an ocean cutting North America in half. Very different landmass, right? This means a very different world. So let me go back really quick and point a couple of things out. Here we are in North America today. You'll notice that big blob of light up there. That, of course, is Greenland, the oddly named Greenland, even though it's white. Greenland is very close to the Arctic Circle, where we have a polar ice cap today, back in the time of T-Rex. No polar ice cap back then. Instead, you have flooded continents. So T-Rex lives in a different world, in a very real sense. Same planet. It walked the same turf that many of us have walked. But the world itself, the climate, the environment is very different. Now, where we had those arrows are arrows where we preserve rock, sedimentary rock. Rock that is basically formed from what's called the lithification, the solidification of sand and mud. And these sands and muds are deposited by lakes and rivers. This is the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. If you want to find T-Rex, that is the best place to go. Go to Montana. That's the kind of T-Rex central, if you will. That is the type of rock where we find fossils of T-Rex. If you go to the Hell Creek Formation today, it is hot. It is dry. And unless you like rocks, like I do, you might not find it beautiful or pleasant. It would hurt your feet to walk on it. There's not much out there. Not much of the land vegetation. Pretty barren. Now, that's what it looks like today. 66 million years ago, that's what it looked like. Lush, green, wet, verdant. Lots of plants, lots of animals. Why do we have these two different situations? Why is it today Montana looks a bit like that, or looks a lot like that, when it looked like that 66 million years ago? You're absolutely right. It was a very long time ago, 66 million years. Also, like I said, the climate was different. The environment was different. How different and why? Well, here's a couple of things to look at. Here we are now, globe of the world, map of the world today. You can see down there the South Pole, Antarctica, giant continental landmass covered with ice. The North Pole, Greenland, that area covered with ice. You'll notice we have a great big Atlantic Ocean between South America and Africa. Giant Pacific Ocean. You'll notice Asia. You can see where India is. It's sitting right on the south part of Asia. That is the world in which we live in. The arrangement of continents and the distribution of ice controls our climate. We're very warm at the equator, very cold at the poles. In the world of T-Rex, no ice at the poles. This is called a greenhouse environment. It's so warm there's no ice. Ice does not form on the surface of Earth during the time of T-Rex. So we have warm, wet poles. You'll notice the Atlantic is not very big. That is because the Atlantic Ocean formed by continental drift and the breaking apart of continental land masses into smaller continental land masses as they move across the surface of the planet forms ocean basins. South America and Africa, much smaller. No hurricanes at this time, for example. Hurricanes are simply an artifact of having an Atlantic Ocean, with Africa being where it is and us being where we are now. No ice, smaller oceans. You'll notice, by the way, this is India. India is actually not part of Asia. India is a separate chunk of continent that goes cruising north from about the South Pole and the Cretaceous to actually strike the underside of Asia and keep plowing into it to build this big single landmass. And guess what is the result of that plowing of India into Asia? The Himalaya, the largest mountain range in the world. You take, just like a bad car accident, you take two continents, push them together, you get crumpling and uplift, it forms mountains. So very, very, very different world. Why is it different? Again, there's no ice. Continents are in different positions. Sea levels were higher in the Cretaceous. You flood continents. The atmosphere was different. There's more carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas, in the atmosphere at the time. So a very different world. We have a warm, wet North America where T-Rex live. And on the margins, close to those oceans, you have river systems, lakes draining into the oceans. And when they drain, they're depositing sediment, mud, and sand. And when you deposit mud and sand and an animal dies, and the conditions are just right, you preserve those animal remains. You get fossils. So these are just examples of fossils of T-Rex. Most T-Rex fossils are not complete skeletons. You might find a foot or a leg. So up there, what you're actually looking at in your upper left is the shoulder blade and the two-toed, two-fingered arm of T-Rex in a chunk of rock. So that long bump coming down is the shoulder blade, and then there are its claws over there. Just the forelimb. That was all that was found in this specimen. The animal died. The carcass was probably torn apart by other scavengers. And then those pieces were eventually buried. So you only get a little bit of it. That's a pretty good fossil of a T-Rex. It's actually not a T-Rex. It's another Tyrannosaur, but that's a complete skull. The lower jaw's intact. As a little baby, you can see, well, little. The skull's about that big. You can see that size of that pencil. That's an example of a really well-preserved specimen. Here is what you would normally find for T-Rex. That's a camera lens for scale. That's a tooth and just a couple of fragments of bone. So when you go to these museums, you see these beautiful, complete skeletons. That's very rare. This is why Sue is so valuable and important. She's almost a complete skeleton. Sometimes you'll find most of a skeleton. This is an excavation of a T-Rex known as MOR555. It's not nearly as sexy a name as Sue. But that is the number for it. It is the skeleton at the Museum of the Rockies. This was found on the Wonkel Ranch. The Wonkel family donated it to the Museum of the Rockies, so it's called the Wonkel Rex. And in the middle, what that is that's the animal's vertebral column, its backbones being excavated. Now, your basic T-Rex was a big animal, as you've seen. You don't walk out into the Badlands and go, hey, T-Rex, pick up the T-Rex and walk home. MOR55, I think, took about 3 years, a helicopter, backhoes, and a flatbed truck to get out of the ground. So, if you're looking for T-Rex, it's easier to find little bits. It's better to find a complete one, but then you're going to need volunteers, money, and time to get it out of the ground. So where we find T-Rex in the late Cretaceous of North America is where we find rocks of the right age, of the right environment, these warm, wet ecosystems. So we can look at T-Rex fossils and we can try and figure out exactly what T-Rex was in the context of the world it lived in. How do we know about T-Rex? When you go look at Sue, you're going to see a lot of information about her. You're going to hear about her diet. You're going to hear about how long she lived. You're going to hear about her behavior. And the question is, how do we understand? How do we know this? We're not just making this up. Believe me, we're not just making this up. But how do we actually understand these fossils, these, well, this is a cast, but these remains, how do we understand them as an animal that lived and breathed, lives in its world. And once we do that, what do we understand about its world? So what we do as paleontologists is we stand in two worlds. We have a foot in two worlds, which is sometimes precarious. On one hand, we're biologists. On the other hand, we're geologists. And we like to tell biologists and geologists that we're actually smarter than both of them because we know about what they both do. So what we do is we look at the biology of living animals, how animals grow, how they relate to their environment, how their physiological processes work, how they digest food, how they chew food, how they behave in getting food, how they live their lives, and we look at the features of their skeletal tissues, their bones, and how those features relate to their lives. And then we use that relationship to actually infer, to estimate what T-Rex is doing for a living. Give you an example. If you take an alligator today, don't do this, I'm just giving you an example. Take the skeleton of an alligator, and if you cut its bones and look at the structure of its bones, you can actually see growth rings. What's the growth ring? I'll back up. Bones, your skeleton, is a type of tissue. We often think of bones as kind of being these static hard things inside of us. Those are living tissues. Anyone here ever broke a bone? How many people here have ever broken a bone? A couple people have, right? Okay. Not fun, and it hurts, because bone is living tissue, and bone heals. So bone grows throughout your life. The only tissues in your body right now that are not actually ever growing are your teeth. Once you shed your baby teeth, get your permanent teeth, those tissues, as you wear down your teeth, they don't grow back. Those are the only tissues. Everything else grows back. So we can look at bone growth. We can look at the bones of T-Rex, and we can actually look at the cellular structure of 66 million-year-old cells. And we can look at the structure of those bones, and we can figure out how T-Rex grew. How many people here have heard of tree rings? Okay, everyone knows what tree rings are, right? So trees grow seasonally. And every time they grow, they lay on a new layer of tissue. And they're in discrete rings. And so you can take a tree, cut it down, and then you can count the rings, and that'll tell you how old the tree is. Animals do this too. So if you look at an alligator, you can count the rings in the leg of an alligator and figure out how old the alligator was before it died. Well, you can also do this with T-Rex. And so up there, the upper left, what you're looking at, is those are cross sections. Those are, someone took the ribs of a tyrannosaur and they cut it. And then they cut it again. They took a thin little section and they ground down a very thin section of that bone, so thin that light can pass through it. And they put it under a microscope and they started to count the growth rings. And what you can do with that, with those growth rings, is it will tell you how old the T-Rex was when it died. You can do other things to figure out how big the T-Rex was, like how much it weighed. For example, we know there's a relationship between the weight of an animal and the size of its femur. So you can estimate the weight of T-Rex. And you can see how big T-Rex got in a certain amount of time. We can actually reconstruct how fast T-Rex grew. And here's what we know about T-Rex. The oldest T-Rex is about 28 to 30 years old. They don't live any longer than that. At least none that we found at the tipping point. Sue was 28. A ripe old age for a T-Rex. At 28 years of age, Sue was about 6.6 tons, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. There's some error in that. Now, T-Rex hatches from an egg probably no bigger than this. In 28 years, T-Rex would go from a baby this long to an animal 42 feet long and 6.6 tons. That averages to T-Rex adding about 1,600 to 1,700 pounds onto its body every year. So think about how fast we grow. You go from a little 8-pound baby when you're born to, if you're a normal adult male, you get to be about 150 to 160 pounds by the time you're 18. So if you figure out how many pounds per year that is, that's a lot slower and a lot less than that T-Rex. T-Rex actually will grow faster than humans. A very fast growth rate. And what that means is that that animal was eating a lot to put on 1,700 pounds a year. That animal was eating probably everything in the landscape. You would not want to be around a juvenile T-Rex. Anyone here who's ever raised a teenager knows they will eat you out of house and home. Now imagine that teenager has to consume enough material to put on 1,700 pounds of weight a year. So you're not going to be around the juvenile T-Rex. What this shows right here is this chart shows the growth curve. That big curve you see, that is the estimate of how big T-Rex got over years. So right down here is the number of years to 30, and then that's its body mass, its weight, inverse gravitational field. So we can reconstruct T-Rex's growth rate. And growth rate is a function of your metabolism. Again, young people, you like to eat. You gotta eat, you gotta get those engine stokes, so you can grow. That's your metabolic rate. How many people here have ever heard the term cold-blooded in respect to reptiles? Okay. Everyone's heard of being cold-blooded. You also hear that about people being cold-blooded. Take the word cold-blooded, crumple it up, and throw it out of your brain. It's a terrible term. Reptiles can actually be very hot. What cold-blooded means is that they can't control their body temperature. When we get cold, we actually burn our fat, we burn tissues to warm up, and then we shiver and we put on a coat. Reptiles have to actually warm their bodies by heating them up in their environment. This is cold-blooded. Well, what we know about T-Rex is it wasn't cold-blooded the way an alligator was. It was actually very unique and very different. Other things we can tell about these animals. Their behavior, we can look at trackways. From trackways, you can actually estimate how fast an animal moved. That's pretty cool. You actually can look at footprints. We only have a few footprints from T-Rex, but we have a pretty good sense of how fast it moved. And if you've ever seen the movie Jurassic Park, which is a mixed bag for paleontologists, there is a scene where they get in a Jeep and then T-Rex chases them and they have to keep accelerating the Jeep to get away from the T-Rex. I am going to give you some bad news for those of you who imagine a T-Rex running like a sprinter. You could walk away from a T-Rex with a fast walk. Basically, less than about 5 miles an hour of locomotion. Why? Because it was 7 tons. A 7-ton animal can't run. If it tripped, it hit the ground, it would splash. It would explode. So T-Rex was not a fast animal, and it's okay that T-Rex wasn't fast, because you only, to be a good predator, you only have to be just about as fast as the animals you're going to eat. And if you've ever looked at a triceratops, this was not a fast animal. So we can tell how fast T-Rex grew. We can tell how fast T-Rex ran. We can tell from other dinosaurs from their footprints about behavior. So this is a slab of rock. You can see that person up there for scale. And this shows a series of trackways in black. So we can reconstruct the patterns of the movement. And we know that the big long-necked sauropod dinosaurs lived in herds with what we call multiple age classes. What that means is that the babies stayed with the adults. And we know this is big round things. Those tracks are those big sauropods. The bird-looking tracks are the tracks of theropods, the meat eaters. And we know the theropods were chasing this herd. We can actually map out the direction of movement and how the theropods are chasing the sauropods, probably picking off the old individuals and eating them along the way. There's a very famous set of footprints down in Biloxi, Texas. And it shows the trackways of a sauropod dinosaur with the trackways of a meat-eating dinosaur walking in parallel. And then all of a sudden, the tracks that you see, the footprints go left, right, left, right, left, right. Except all of a sudden, on the meat-eating dinosaur, they go left, right, left, right, left, 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 right, left, right. And the sauropod feet get all weird. And basically what happened is that the meat-eater actually jumped on the sauropod. And we can see it reflected because he's hanging on to him, hopping on one foot. So we can get a lot of information about dinosaurs from their tracks. What else do we know about T-Rex? Again, everyone loves T-Rex, so we focus a lot on T-Rex. Well, we know about what it ate. This is going to seem like a no-brainer if you look at Sue about what she ate. But how do we infer, how do we understand what extinct animals ate? We look at their teeth. We look at how modern animals use their teeth, and we can extrapolate that onto the fossils. So, on the left we have a coyote, or a hyena, I can't tell from here. On the right we have a beaver. Notice the differences in their teeth. On the left, you have teeth that are good for crushing and piercing and tearing, and on the right, you have a set of wood chippers. So we look at the morphology, the shapes of these teeth, and from there, we can compare fossils to living animals. So in the case of T-Rex, a good modern comparison is with a Komodo Dragon. So up there is the lower jaw of the Komodo Dragon with big, sharp, serrated, cutting teeth. To the right, there's a Komodo Dragon doing what it does best, which is eating a pig. So Komodo dragons use their teeth to crush and to cut meat. This is the tooth of a T-Rex. There is the mouth of a T-Rex. We know from T-Rex's teeth